But yes, I'm very honored to be invited as the kind of the tabletop games guest of honor. When I got emailed about it initially, I was kind of like, oh, I've never been the guest of honor for anything. Is this real? And then I was like, wait, I know a friend from Finland. I can ask her. And I was like, oh, friend from Finland, can you tell me if Tracon is real? And they're like, it's so real, I work at it. I'm like, oh, good, yes. So yes. Very, very, very honored to be a part of it. I write tabletop RPGs, as I say in my introduction. The kind of I kind of summarize what I like to write and run as loud gay trash. Hands up those who appreciate the energy of loud gay trash. Excellent. I'm in good company. Sick. And also writing with an Afrofuturist flavor. For those who don't know what that word means, it's basically kind of talking about a speculative, it's like sci-fi, speculative future, but focused on African and Caribbean communities. If you've seen Black Panther, or if you've listened to the music by Janelle Monáe, you kind of have that idea in mind. In addition to those kind of things, I absolutely love mysteries. I love mysteries a lot. I am one of those people that kind of grew up watching CSI, like maybe too young for for the content involved, but go like, ooh, zoom, enhance. But I also grew up with a ton of mystery manga. When Case Closed was originally being kind of like printed in English, I was really into that. I was obsessed with the Phoenix Wright games when they initially came out on DS, and that was like my entire life for a while. I was one of those Danganronpa fans. For better or for worse. He's a very good mystery writer. His character writing is so-so. His new game is very interesting. Go play Raincode if you want more Danganronpa, but without teenage awkwardness in it. And if you're one of like the 3 people that has ever watched the TV show Veronica Mars, also that show is excellent. But these are all very, not lowbrow, but not like high concept mysteries, right? They're very pulpy. And in sometimes not always very complex. And I think one of the big takeaways I'm going to try and impart today is that mysteries do not need to be Agatha Christie. They do not need to be super complicated. They do not need to be difficult for you to write or to run. Writing mysteries and running mysteries in tabletop RPGs can be fun and easy. It doesn't need to be high art to be fun and entertaining. What we are going to be covering today, we're definitely going to be doing the first 3 points today. We're going to be talking about how to run investigation scenarios as a game master. We're going to be going over some examples which may or may not have happened to you in the past. Don't feel ashamed if they have. It happens to all of us. Different ways to write mystery scenarios. There is not one way. There are a myriad, lots of different ways, and we'll be going over a couple. And there'll be a general audience Q&A. If there is time, I did time this, but it usually runs a little, like 15 minutes longer than the time we have, so we'll see if we can get around to it. We might write a mystery together at the end of the scenario, or I might be too nervous. We'll see, but hopefully we'll get around to it. But first, has this ever happened to you? You have been playing a game of the Dungeons and Dragons style of variety, and you're maybe exploring a wizard's laboratory of some kind. And you're like, I want to investigate a bookshelf. And the GM is like, please roll your dice to see whether you investigate the bookshelf, and you roll a 5. Your intelligence stat is not very high. And then the GM says, you don't find anything. And actually what the GM has in their notes is that there is a very important book there that is crucial to you blowing the entire case wide open, but because you didn't arbitrarily get the right number, you don't find it, and then you spend the next 40 minutes just looking around this room, or maybe being like, there's nothing important here, and just leaving, and then you never see the important clue. Has this happened in some kind of variety to anybody before? I'm seeing nods. It sucks. It's miserable. It's so much not fun. I'd like tabletop RPGs can take a while to do. You've managed to schedule time, a precious 3 hours with people who have entirely different work schedules to you, and you're going to spend it maybe finding a clue, or maybe just going home not having gotten to the core of that mystery. And that can be really depressing. What I think is the most important thing is making sure that when you are rolling dice in games, and this is true for mysteries and in general, Rolling is only when the outcome would be interesting. You don't find it or you don't do it, doesn't really like help push the story along. We're trying to make a collaborative story, and I don't think I've ever read a piece of fiction where the characters in it were just like, I don't know, and then the book just stops for like 2 chapters. In fact, there is a very famous mystery video game. I was going to do a whole thing about, can you guess what game it is? And then I pressed the space bar too early so you can see what it is. Can you guess what video game I'm going to be talking about next? Oh my God, you're psychic! But yes, Disco Elysium is an excellent game. It's really atmospheric and depressing and emotive and complex, and there's all these sorts of things that you can do. And it's very much inspired by tabletop RPGs and the big range of stats that you have and the way that you roll dice to be able to see whether you could clear different kind of checks in it. And there's a really common thing in it, if you don't know, called a white check. This is rolling some dice against your stats to see if you can pass a particular difficulty of a check. And if you don't do it, if you don't get the right number, you just don't proceed in whatever it is. Regardless of what you know and can do, you might know that the next important piece of the story is behind jumping over a wall, and the game will just be like, you just don't jump over the wall. Go wander around elsewhere until enough time has passed and you've gained enough EXP to attempt it again, and then the game still says, no, you don't do it. And then I soft reset and make sure that I actually get to do it. That would be, it works well for a video game because video games are a little different from the realms of books and movies and tabletop RPGs, because video games have infinite time. I don't have infinite time. I only have a small amount of time to play video games in my work week, but the game will wait for me. Whereas if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons in real life, you only have those 3.5 hours, so you can't really wait to see if you eventually go and pass the check. Similarly, in movies, regardless of how well you are caught up with understanding what the case will be solved without you, and you'll eventually be able to be guided along to the end of the story. If you're reading a book, you can always flick back in the book to go and find some of the clues that you had earlier and can solve it alongside the detective in the book. So each different type of media all do mystery type stories, but they all kind of go about them in different ways. This is all to say, don't leave important clues to chance. As I said before, remember, only roll dice when the outcome is interesting and would move the story forward, and not finding critical information does neither of those things. In a similar way, I like to kind of avoid instances where it's like an informed ability. To explain, say one of the player characters is a medic of some kind, and they're working as part of a crime scene investigation. And then you had them roll to see if they could find the cause of death on a body. And then they rolled super low. And the GM can't say, you don't know what it is. You're a professional doctor. You should be able to actually know what that is. And so basically making sure that the kind of critical information that characters should know is given to them over the course of the adventure. There are no real dead ends in a mystery, as I was saying earlier. You don't have books where they just reach a dead end and they never solve the case. There's always a way forward. The story is always progressing, whether they succeed in some ways or fail in others. But, I have had a contradiction in what I've just said. I can hear in the audience, people are saying, hold the fuck on a moment. I just said that clues should be guaranteed, but I've also just said that rolling the dice is when things are interesting. And finding clues can be interesting. Getting the key piece of information can be a high piece of drama. But actually, it's not a complete contradiction. Rolling to investigate can actually be fun and valuable. It's what you're rolling for is the important thing. It's not that you're rolling to find the important clue, it's about the context around it. So, say for example, my player character is a hacker, and I have broken in to the mayor's office to go and find some indiscreet dealings that they have done. And I might be rolling, and my GM is maybe rolling for detail. I'm making my hacking check to see if I break into the computer, and the result I get isn't whether I break in, it's about how much information I find before I'm locked out, or how detailed that information is. Or it might be for drama. I'm hacking, and I'm rolling not to see whether I get in, but whether the alarms on the computer like go off and armed people start rushing into the room to put me on a time limit. It's making sure that you do get the important information, but also increasing the drama every time somebody rolls. It's all about building up that tension to make the players excited about following through on the mystery. And in fact, a really useful tool straight up in being able to get people thinking quite heavily about the clues that they're gathering is asking the players what they want to know. It might be in that circumstance of hacking into the mayor's computer, and they roll and succeed, and I'll be like, here's some information that you just get that I'm going to be telling you anyway, but what are 2 things you want to know about? And then their brain is already ticking. Maybe with the information that I've just given them about the clues, there is a file on the computer that's marked taxes, and inside is very much not taxes. But they might be asking other things like, who is the person in that photo? Do I recognize them? Oh, there's lots of receipts for this. Are there receipts for nightclubs that I can go investigate? The players are immediately that much more engaged by asking questions around the mystery. To give a couple of examples of some tabletop RPGs that do the kind of like clue role in investigating quite well. There are 2 I really like, Monster of the Week and City of Mist. Monster of the Week is actually reasonably popular. Folks heard of Monster of the Week? Sure. It's a powered by the apocalypse game that is inspired by the likes of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Supernatural, and to a degree Scooby-Doo, where it is people investigating what is kind of attacking their local town. And as a result, the way that its clue writing goes, it's the one on the left that says when you investigate a mystery, roll plus sharp. That like mechanic specifically comes with a list of questions. And it does what I said earlier about inviting the player to specifically engage in thinking about what they want to know. On the other side of things, City of Mist, which is one of my favorite tabletop RPGs I'll probably be talking about a lot across this presentation. It's the one on the right, their investigate move. Instead of answering a question straight away, they get clues that are abstract. They essentially get tokens that they can cash in later to ask about the thing that they looked into. So we might have the scene again of hacking into this mayor's computer, and we get the scene of the hacking and we do the roll and they succeed, and then it fades away. And we don't see what we find out. And maybe later on, when there are other investigations going on, the player will be like, oh, I hacked into the mayor's computer later. Is there some information that I found there that's useful in this information? They can cache that clue in. And I find that really, really elegant because, again, it kind of lets the player engage a lot on thinking about how they want to solve the clue and how they're using that knowledge rather than just directly following a breadcrumb trail you've left in front of them. Now, making more clues than you think you need sounds like a bit of busy work, but it's actually really, really useful in making sure that a mystery is solvable by a really wide range of people. There is something called the 3-clue rule that was kind of codified by a man called Justin Alexander, or the Alexandrian. There'll be a link at the end of a bunch of the references and stuff that I've mentioned, so you can kind of follow that and read the article yourself. He talks about the 3-clue rule as something that appears in a lot of already written fiction. He gives an example about how Sherlock Holmes manages to work out somebody's height by seeing some footsteps outside and how far they are apart. Seeing some disturbed dust and being able to work out that it's the same footprints as the person outside, and something being written on the wall and highlighting that people tend to, if they're writing on walls, write at their eye line, and using all 3 of those bits of information together to work out the person's height. You might actually be able to do that with just finding the shoe prints outside, the shoe prints inside, or the writing on the wall, but by having multiple ways of finding the same piece of information, even if your players are not looking in the exact same place that you think that they should be, they are still multiple ways of them getting to the same conclusion. It also prevents circumstances of people assuming a clue is a red herring, because if you find multiple pieces of information that highlight one thing, then you know it's definitely going to be true because there's multiple pieces that are corroborating that information. Also, breaking character is very important. Sorry, give me a second. I do a lot of tabletop RPG streaming and podcasting. and there is a sort of a necessity in that style of play to kind of maintain the narrative while you're going and trying to stay in character, or making a character and staying in character a lot of time. But breaking character is entirely okay. As a GM, when you're playing at home and people aren't watching you, at least as far as you know, then you don't need to be Matt Mercer. You don't need to be in character the entire time, and finding opportunities to break character when it's important to do so and it will help your players is really important. If you're seeing them getting frustrated about not understanding how the stuff connects together, give them a hint. It's fine. The mystery isn't ruined that you have to go and help them along the way a little bit, and they're going to be happy that they know where they need to keep looking. A good way to get people to engage with information that they've just been given, because sometimes you can give somebody a clue and they'll look at that clue and be like, cool, I now know some footprints, but I don't know what those footprints mean. And asking them, you don't necessarily need to ask them this the same way every time because they'll catch on, but asking players, what do you want to do with that information is a really good way to already get them starting to think about how they can connect those bits and pieces together. Similarly, if you've ever played a bard in the Dragon game, I'm sure your game master has not been, well, play the song on the piano then. Since you know how to play an instrument, can you sing in real life? And you're like, no. And you're like, well, you don't get to do the performance role then unless you can sing. That's unreasonable. That's silly. Nobody, sometimes it's nice when you can also do the thing that your character can do, but it's unfair to assume that the players are going to have the exact same memory as the characters in the narrative. So if it's something a character would know and the player has forgotten, it's fine, just remind them. It's a thing, it's not going to break the narrative at all, it's not going to slow down play, just letting them know what's going on, where they can be going next. And also, finally, in that wizard study, there are many bookcases, there are many potion bottles, and we could spend 45 minutes investigating every single bookshelf to see if there's something interesting, and that is my description of hell. Don't do that, or at least I wouldn't be around to do that. If there are instances where there are no more clues or no more interesting things to do in a room, it's entirely fine to say, you've discovered all the clues here. Where would you like to go next? And just kind of keep that story moving. While this isn't necessarily TV or movies, I think one of the ways that you can make a tabletop RPG consistently exciting is thinking about pace and making ways to kind of give those pauses to let players think over what they want to do next and how they want to connect those clues together, but also not letting them dwell in one place for too long because you've already written 10 pages of all these exciting places that they can go and see and you want them to see it all. Speaking of, please make a clue list. This is from personal experience of writing a mystery and then not having a separate document of like every single clue that they're supposed to be able to find, and then you've been exploring the wizard's laboratory and then just about their leave, oh shit, there was also the green potion did a thing. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Well, and that happens to the best of us even when we have the clue list together, but I think writing the list of the clues is an excellent fail-safe to kind of make sure that all the bits and pieces you know are supposed to happen will actually happen when they need to. It also does mean that you can actually invent new clues. Excuse me. When you have a really detailed list of what you're supposed to be able to find, it's actually not too hard to start thinking of new ways to connect that evidence up. You might not have at the time thought of having footprints both outside and inside the house, but because you have the list of the stuff outside and the writing on the wall, you're like, oh, this is a third way of letting them know this piece of information. It's easier to go and make that up. Also, if you're doing more than just a one-shot, I find it really useful for both you and the players. This is also about, generating excitement for the players in having a document that both you and they can access and edit that has a list of all the characters and the story that happened so far. It can be really difficult to elect somebody in your group of people to be the kind of like archivist who's writing what happens in each episode. I didn't used to do that very much, and then one of the campaigns I was involved in, one player was training to be a lawyer, and so has god-tier note-taking skills, and after watching him work, I'm like, well, now I have to step up my game. But it can be really, really useful, especially when scheduling can be so difficult, and it might be a month since you played last. You're like, what did we do last time? What clues did we find? mind. And having that written down is really, really useful. To give an example, there was a high school mystery style campaign that I ran called The Strange Tales of Mainframe City Academy. And what I did was have a full list of all the characters that they met, and then I let the players write down what they thought of each person in character, and they updated those feelings about those characters as the story went along, and sometimes the information about those characters would update after things happened to them or they got convicted or those kind of things. It can be even useful if you're one of the lucky people that get to play in person, actually having physical clue cards around. There's something really satisfying. In the same way that it's really satisfying to have a bunch of dice in your hands, you're like, oh yes, moving them around, or flicking cards if you're the kind of Magic the Gathering player that flicks the cards in your hand. I understand the need to stim, but still. Having physical clues written down that players can literally move around, do the kind of like Charlie Day conspiracy board meme of connecting all that information up, maybe less manic than that, but actually giving them a way to connect that evidence physically as well as in their heads makes it way easier to retain that information. Also, you as the GM really benefit from having that list, because you can be like, oh, there's a character I introduced in our second session that I've not had them do anything in a while. Let's have them commit a murder. And then you can kind of bring them back in to the story because you know all the interesting people in. Okay. Hopefully that was all good so far. That was generally my GM running advice. Let's get to the writing advice. How are we doing for time? We're doing all right. 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 Yes. Good. Okay. Ways of writing a mystery. There are lots of tabletop RPGs that are specifically about mysteries, and a lot of them also tend to have writing advice in them about how to run that game specifically. And sometimes people ask, in fact, I ask, like, which one is the best one? And that's not really a thing. Ultimately, the advice that they give is useful for that system, but there are many systems out there, and you might be writing a mystery for a game that doesn't have dedicated mystery writing advice. So the best example is actually just having a look at all of them and picking some of those ideas that work best for you and your own kind of like time and energy levels, because maintaining your own energy levels as GMs is actually really important, and also the energy levels and focus of your players. I'm going to kind of give a couple of different examples here with different levels of complexity, and you can take little bits from each of them. I find that if you're doing a mystery campaign, it's actually a good idea to use different styles of mystery writing for different sessions, because it gives them all a different texture, if that makes sense. The first one I'm going to talk about is mini mysteries. This is the kind of thing, I guess I would explain it as, we're going to just start wondering now. I'm allowed to do that. If you've ever seen those kind of like animes where it's kind of like, ooh, the 7 mysteries of Akihabara. There's like paranormal goings on and there's rumors and the characters are like investigating each of those individually. And those could be individual episodes, or it could be a single session where you're investigating multiple at once. And this is what mini mysteries are essentially designed to do. They're a really good way of introducing your characters to a new location, because you are encouraging them to look at lots of different places in one session. These can be really easy to write in terms of mystery solving, because it essentially breaks down in your GM notes to what the location is, what the rumor about it that the players have heard to get them to investigate that location, and then what the actual truth is. And sometimes what the rumor is and the truth is can be the same thing, but it could be really interesting to have that contrast between what you're telling your players and what is actually there. Because these are all mini mysteries, you don't need to go too in depth with them, because also you're using this as a way to encourage the players to keep moving. Maybe there is a time limit. Maybe you're exploring a haunted theme park and you're trying to go and find all the mysteries that are happening at this theme park before it closes for the day and everybody's kicked out. So it kind of subconsciously encourages players to be thinking about what the truth is, but also not to dwell in one place, because they know they need to get to all these places before closing. It works really well for one-shots in particular. And because the clue writing is quite light, improvising new clues is actually really easy. and you can be a bit dynamic about what your players are reactive to what your players are looking into and being like, well, actually, I didn't think of writing down what's here, but because this is quite simple and quite light, it's really easy to make up a new clue. An example of that, I did a stream a while ago where a bunch of rowdy teens were exploring a mall after hours about the kind of 3 haunted mysteries. There was like an arcade machine where if you lost it would take your soul. There was a ghost at the top of an indoor roller coaster. And all of them had kind of like cyberpunky technological explanations as to why they were there. But it was really useful to kind of have a map handy and a bunch of points of interest so they knew exactly how many things they needed to look into and what they have and haven't done. And yeah, there's an example I've kind of got there where they were investigating the roller coaster. And it's talked about what the location is and the kind of like what is on the kind of like computer network within that roller coaster that is causing that ghostly effect. Being able to kind of like break it down that way. A more medium kind of challenge in terms of the amount of time invested, this will take a little bit longer to write, but still not that long, is what I call a lost and found style mystery. Lost and found style mysteries are not necessarily murder mysteries, which is actually, I think, quite interesting. I think there is a lot of assumption or emphasis on crime dramas specifically about murder, but there's lots of more mysteries about that. Sometimes it can be trying to find a person or an object that has moved between lots of different places and you're kind of tracking them down. If you've ever played the video game Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, or seen like the cartoon or anything like that, the way that that game works is that you are at a city somewhere in the world, and you are trying to find where Carmen Sandiego has gone next. And you're speaking to the people there, and they're giving hints about like, oh, it's the city that has the Eiffel Tower in it. It's a game for 8-year-olds. And you work out where to go next, and after following those clues between different locations, you eventually result in the final location where you are. You've tracked down the successful, the target, the object, the person, what have you. I actually really like this style of mystery writing. It is my favorite because it's really easily compartmentalized. It's really easy to break down a big mystery into lots of discrete locations that are shorter and easier to write. Like writing mysteries is like writing novels in that you kind of like, well, where do I start? I have all these ideas, but how do I cement it into one really long adventure? And you don't need to. You can break it down into small bits and pieces. And in each of those locations, you can have a list of individual clues. And what we were talking about earlier about those rule of 3 clues, you can have 2 different locations that give you information about the same clue. And then those 2 locations, whether they investigate one or the other first, they're still getting that key piece of information. And if they visit both, they are doubly getting that piece of information. To talk about City of Mist again, it gives an example of the kind of lost and found mystery, which it uses called the iceberg method. The iceberg method, you see the tip of the iceberg at the start of the mystery. This is the first thing that you encounter. Maybe it is the crime scene where you see the chalk outline of the body, and you have some initial ideas about what to investigate next. You know, you might find a business card for a nightclub on the body and be like, okay, one of the locations we now need to go visit is the nightclub. Or you might go to the morgue and talk to the coroner who will tell you about the cause of death, and then they were like, oh, they were actually drowned in a vat of strawberry gelatin. And you're like, oh, there's a sweets factory in this city. Maybe we can go there and find out if they have a giant tub of gelatin that somebody could drown in. And from that, those are 2 locations that you can visit, and you go to those locations, and those can give you additional hints about other locations, and you go deeper into the iceberg until you find the end result. The diagram on the right is like that kind of iceberg method with kind of specific contexts. And you see that the crime scene and the victim's life both can lead to exploring like the issues that the same next location to go and visit. You could travel there. Now, I call this tricky to write, not difficult to write, because obviously the aim of this is insisting that writing mysteries is not hard. So this is tricky and rather than hard. It's the most time invested, maybe. And this is technically two different but related styles of mystery writing at once: clue gathering mysteries and interrogation mysteries. Clue gathering mysteries are probably what you would find your like CSIs or Sherlock Holmeses, where you're going to those places and finding those individual clues, those footprints, that writing on the wall, the business card that they drowned in gelatin, and you're gathering those information together, and then once you have all the clues, looking at all those clues together will tell you the truth. On the other side of things, there's interrogation style mysteries, where it is individually speaking to people and getting testimony from them, and then looking at other people's testimony and finding the inconsistencies. The best way to kind of like delineate, to separate these two ideas, is that finding clues will explain the truth, and comparing testimonies exposes lies. And you can write a good mystery using just one of those techniques. But if you are familiar with the Phoenix Wright series or the Danganronpa series, you probably experienced both of these done together, because those games have phases where you are out in the field gathering all that evidence, all those clues, and then you're going to the trial and then listening to somebody lie to your face, and you're like, well, I have this clue that says that you're full of bullshit. And that process actually is time proven to be incredibly satisfying. There is something, especially if, you know, that thing earlier about the physical cards of the evidence, running that game, having one of my players pick up one of those cards and genuinely like slam it down on the table, they're like, you liar! And I'm like, yes, you're having the time that I was hoping you would have, excellent. That kind of a combination of the two can work really, really well. Both of these styles of mystery writing, if you want to be able to do them without it being a complete headache, need you to write the timeline of the crime that happens. Just a clue list won't cut it, because you need to know when those things happened. The easiest way I would do that as general advice is to write out how they did the thing perfectly. Like if they left no evidence, if they did everything perfectly and they would have got away with it scot-free. You write that, and then you go back over that plot of how they did the thing and find all the places where they could have screwed up, and then add in those places, that's where the clues are, that's where the inconsistencies are, that's when they were spotted by somebody, that's when they left some thread trapped in a door as they was running towards the exit. Sometimes those can compound on each other as you're building out the storyline. Maybe they were running through a doorway, like a fire exit to escape the scene, and their jacket tore on the door, and you're like, okay, so we've got some fabric that's torn on the door, but they probably wouldn't be running around with a torn jacket because it would give the game away. Okay, how did they get rid of the jacket? And how did that go wrong? And then you kind of find those different ways of being able to kind of add to the full list. Speaking of another stream that I've done, again, the videos of these particular games will be in a little like a bit.ly link to you to follow. There'll be a YouTube playlist so you can see all these examples in full. But I ran a very Persona 5 style tabletop session where they were against the prosecutor who committed a murder and then tried to cover it up because it's like, oh, I'm the prosecutor. There's no way that I would commit the murder. Having played any Phoenix Wright game ever, you know that that is definitely something that they can and do often. But you can see in the top left, they were gathering those clues across the session. And then at the end of the session where they ran into the prosecutor, he was trying to convict an entirely different person. They were able to kind of use those clues. Actually, like in battle form, like as they used the clues, it was dealing the prosecutor damage. Because, you know, we're playing in a kind of urban fantasy setting where we can get away with things like that. So you can turn mysteries into combat tactics if you want to be like that, I suppose. You also have these kind of interrogation style mysteries in real life. Have you ever been to like a murder mystery dinner party before? Yeah. Nice. They can be a lot of fun. They can be a lot of fun. It's a way to get your like auntie who has never done any role playing in her life go and be like a train conductor who committed crimes for some reason. They're all quite interesting, but to immediately spoil most dinner party mystery kits, because it's going to be a different kind of murderer every time. Most of the booklets that you get that say all the things that you need to say on them to be your character will have a separate version that is, these are the things you say instead if you are decided to be the murderer. So as long as you speak to everybody and ask all the questions in the book, you will immediately work out who it is. It's just a matter of speaking to everybody. But it can be really satisfying to go and play, practice your voice acting skills, do your character acting skills in the space where you're allowed to be bad because everybody's like 3 glasses of wine deep. There's also convention-style murder mysteries. There is a large convention in the UK called Tracon. It actually works in a kind of similar space to this in terms of the number of like panels and events, actually. But one of the event organizers, Nez Long, organized a live-action murder mystery event called It Was Fucking One of Yous, where a bunch of cosplayers were like Phoenix Wright style characters in a murder mystery, and you went around in groups to speak to them and get those testimonies and wander between the different sections. And I found that really fascinating because while I'm used to writing mysteries where you are usually in a static location individually and there are not many people there, but there are objects to investigate. Having a wide range of people to speak to and no real direction on who to speak to first is a really fascinating way of doing a mystery, because you need to make sure that they're all very carefully interwoven in a way that no matter who you speak to first, you know that you need to go and speak to some other people. And that can just be speaking to each one of them one at a time. But it can also be like, oh, I spoke to person A, and now I spoke to person B, and now I've spoken to person B. I know that person A was lying through their teeth. I need to go back to speak to person A again and say what's up. And that kind of process is actually really, really exciting, because there's something about realizing not just that there was a lie, but that you need to move to get that person who was lying can give a surprising amount of drama to a story. And that's something I definitely want to kind of use in more games going forward. I spoke to Nez about it, and they gave me two bits of information here. I think the main thing I loved about it was crafting that story and going through and trying to predict all the different scenarios. Deconstructing the story in that way allows for so many avenues to explore and fix. It gives you a real structural perspective of the whole experience. And then also a notable challenge was at the planning stage, tying together any loose threads and balancing to ensure it wasn't too easy or too challenging. Somehow got it just right, but not knowing during that first hour was really stressful. But a thing that they did, in addition to having that mystery there, was actually having somebody on available who wasn't part of the story, but was available to give hints and clues about proceedings. It did mean that even though I'm somebody who enjoys mystery a lot, I got stuck, and I was kind of like, hey, you know what? I still have time. I'm going to go ask the kind of like rule setter, like the game master, and be kind of like, hey, this is what we as a group understand so far, but there's these bits that we're confused on. Do we understand everything we've been told so far? Do we have it right? And they were like, yeah, you do have it right. Actually, have you spoken to this person about that thing yet? And we're like, oh, we haven't yet, thank you. And then just continued on with the adventure. It didn't take too long. We didn't feel stupid for doing it. It's just kind of, I think there's both on the player and GM side of things, there's always a fear that if the mystery isn't going perfectly well, that it's ruined or somebody's being an idiot. Nobody is. Sometimes it's just oh, I didn't understand, that's what you meant kind of situation. So just taking that time to be open and candid can be really, really useful. But hey, sometimes, what if you just don't want to write a mystery? Well, you're like, I want to write a mystery, but I also just don't want to. I refuse. Well, actually, there are some tabletop RPGs that let you do that. There's two particularly notable ones, or I guess technically 3. that use a randomization element in order to design the mystery. So not even the GM really knows what the truth is. For quite a while, it was two systems, Tech Noir and Mech Noir. If you're a fan of the podcast Friends at the Table, they ran a Mech Noir campaign for quite a while, so you might be familiar that way. But they have what are essentially like play sets that give a list of names, a list of motives, a list of locations, a list of objects. And at the start of the campaign or session or what have you, you select a couple of people, a couple of locations, and draw some connections there. And then as you continue to investigate, and you're like, oh, you interrogate a person, and the person is like, I saw somebody at the club that night. That person was, and then you go and rummage in the characters pile and pull a new character and add it to the map, making that Charlie Day conspiracy board live as you go. It's not entirely random because the play set has been made in advance. You know that eventually across this mystery there is going to be a stolen diamond. You know that somebody has gambling debts. You just don't know who or why or how that's going to factor into the mystery, and that can be a surprise for everybody. There is also released late last year, early this year, a game called Brindlewood Bay. That was described by the writer as Golden Girls meets Call of Cthulhu. For real. Where it is a bunch of like elderly ladies who are all big fans of like detective novels, and as a result decide that they want to be detectives and solving mundane mysteries in their local town, but invariably those local mysteries actually tend to be a lot more sinister than what they could be. And as a game, it's actually really elegant. There's a whole bunch of like moves in the game. It's powered by the Apocalypse game. It has a whole bunch of abilities that are really about being an elderly person getting into other people's business and getting away with it because you're an old person. You couldn't actually have ulterior motives. But at the same time, there is almost a huge list of clues for each scenario in this. Rather than having like a list of characters, a list of locations and how they connect, it's a big random pool. And there is a move specifically in the game to, I want to investigate this location and get a clue. And then the GM pulls one from that pool. It could be any of them. It might not even necessarily make sense depending on the, and then you kind of work together to make that clue make sense with where you found it. And then at the end of the game, you let the players describe how they thought the crime took place, trying to use as many clues that they found as possible, and they get a bonus to their roll that sees whether they're right or not. And it's really, really good at what I would say describing the feel of a mystery game without having to do any mystery solving. You might have a theory about, as a player, you might have a theory about what the events are, but also you don't have to come up with a theory until you reach the end of the scenario. And that can be really, that's a lot less stressful, I think, for some players. So some players want to, fight kobolds and they don't want to have to kind of like think about connecting clues. And this kind of style of thing is actually really a good fit for that. You could use this in all sorts of games that don't have mystery solving mechanics and still have a mystery themed thing. But is that really what you want? Is it really? You know how I mentioned earlier about the satisfying feeling of watching my players realize that they had the evidence to counter the lies I told, and the enthusiasm of what they slammed down on the table to say that they had understood it, and what they understood was really exciting and they wanted to find out more? You don't really get that in a randomized mystery because there is no reveal so much. Or there isn't a kind of getting your suspicions confirmed in the story. It's only at the end. One more thing, just one more thing, in fact. I've run this panel before, like earlier this year, and since then, a YouTube video came out. The YouTube channel Game Maker's Toolkit, or Mark Brown, who does videos about video game design specifically. And he's done a couple of videos about detective games. And the interesting thing that he kind of raised in those was that he didn't like games where he didn't feel like he was solving the case himself without hints. in his mind, being given hints or being given a finite list of options meant that he wasn't being a detective. He was kind of like being guided along the experience of being a detective. And I can understand that, but also I disagree. Or rather, what he likes, say the video games like Return of the Obra Dinn, where you are exploring a cruise ship via time travel to work out how all the people on the ship died. And the game gives you clues for you to go and connect together, but it doesn't tell you when you have the clues. It only tells you if you manage to get 3 people right in terms of who they are, what their role is, and how they died. If you don't get 3 people right, the game will just continue to not tell you anything until you manage to work out 3 correct people. And you get to feel really, really smart when you connect all that information together. But also, it takes a really, really long time. I love mystery games, and I sat at that game and was like, I've been playing this game for like 4 hours and I have only worked out how like 6 people have died and there's like 40 people on the ship. Oh my God. And it can be really tiring and exhausting. And I think that's a really satisfying experience, but I don't think it works very well for tabletop RPGs. And then I realized what the disconnect was. Mark was thinking about detective games where you feel like a detective versus, I guess, my personal philosophy, which doesn't have to be the right philosophy. You might be sitting through this and being like, I'm talking absolute nonsense, and I respect it. But I guess I'm thinking about stuff feeling like a detective TV show, where you are working in a narrative arc and guiding everybody along for the ride, or everybody wanting to travel with you on that narrative arc, where at the end of the hour, 3 hours, you have told an interesting story, and keeping that pace up and finding the ways to keep that pace as you work through the story. Columbo is a really interesting kind of counterexample to almost everything we've talked about today, because at the start of every Columbo episode, it tells you who did the murder and how they did it, which is usually what it will be the crux in any other mystery story. And then what the interesting thing about what Columbo does and what makes it exciting to watch every time is watching Columbo find the flaws, find the inconsistencies, find what we wrote previously about how the mystery went wrong and those little threads that he's really good at pulling at. And that's really interesting in its own way. It's possible to tell mysteries in all sorts of ways. You can do them randomized, you can plot them a really long form in advance, or you can just be a very unassuming old man in a dirty trench coat who's just really good at getting under people's skin. Right. It's now cross-examination time, which is actually questions and answers. I did a lot of talking. I'm very sorry. Hopefully it was interesting. But does anybody have any questions? And I will run around. And I'm just going to come up to you. I love being like a game show host like that. Yes. No, it's all good. We made it. We made it. Thank you. Here you go, my friend.
Thank you. So my question is not only in mystery games, but in D&D too. What if your character is very smart, but you're not as a player?
That is entirely okay. I'm not very smart a lot of the time. No, I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about information your characters know, but you as a player might not know, shouldn't be punished. If it's a thing that the GM realizes that your character should know and it's relevant, they can just tell you. That's allowed. I think even, like all issues in tabletop games, it's always about a communication between the GM and the player and being willing to have that conversation. It can be really scary to say to the GM, I don't understand this, or this thing is frustrating to me. Because, you know, somebody might get their feelings hurt being kind of like, oh, they're saying that my GMing is bad, oh no. And it's just, you're asking for clarification. So yeah. I think it's entirely okay to be kind of like, I as a person don't get it. Can you explain what my character knows so I know too? And then letting it rock from there. And then if the GM says, no, I won't tell you, then they're being rude and you should just go home. Just get an early night, it's great. Get some sleep, we should all do with some more sleep. I could do with some more sleep. Okay, wandering back. To the stairs here. Right, who's next? Yes. Sorry. Hello. Here you go, darling.
Hello. So actually, you mentioned, with the bit that the Golden Girls Call of Cthulhu example, but actually, have you ever tried Call of Cthulhu? That's the idea, the system of the idea roll, and I would like to ask you, do you have your opinion about that to using on different games, if you're familiar with the system, the idea roll?
Sure. Actually, I'm yet to actually play Call of Cthulhu. It's one of those things. It's funny because I know that the way that the game is probably run now is not in the way that Lovecraft is like super racist, right? Yeah. The game as a system has probably taken big steps away from that kind of world, but it's kind of me as a person who's all been like, is that a game I want to play? But I think, as I was saying before, what is the best clue-solving system is all the clue-solving systems that you've read and incorporating them in different ways.
Yeah, if you're actually familiar with the idea roll, where it's like, so you're gonna like the party can like call for an idea roll, and where they like roll intelligence, and if they succeed or in order to fail, they basically the keeper, the game master, kind of like. It gives them a little bit of a nudge towards where like maybe like say if they succeeded they may like see like wait a minute, I know that's a cultist guy and he's going to that bookstore, whereas in like if you fail you notice you are in that bookstore and you notice that there's some cultists in there and you recognize it, and then you realize that oh crap, it's closing in, the windows are going down and we're into a fight. This is like the example the game or actually the keeper's handbook gives you. So like would you think that this is actually like a good system where it doesn't give you an answer, it more like nudges you, like gives you like just a little bit of a nudge to the right direction that you can use?
No, I think that's I'm going to wiggle back this way again, sorry. I think that's actually a fantastic idea. It goes back to what I kind of said earlier, where you're not rolling to get the super important clue, you're rolling for the drama around that clue. So in that particular instance, it's the GM being like, hey, we know that this is the next important location that we want to go to, but is it going to be easy or is it going to be a nightmare? And finding that way of increasing the drama every time we roll is definitely a really good way of keeping the pace and the tension up. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm just going to be a long noodle and just reach over the seats.
Well, you talked about having time limits in your solving mysteries. So, would it be a bad idea to have the time limit be a physical timer, or should it be like more of a how many things you can do here or how many things you can investigate before the time closes?
I think both of those are actually a really good way of making there be pace and tension. I think that is a discussion that you have with your players, right? Because there are some players that like time limits. Yeah, like the people who like board games where there's time limits and stuff like that can be really excited about a physical like hourglass ticking down. But for some people that would give them unbridled anxiety in a way that's not fun for them. So having that kind of conversation is a really good thing to do in like the early sessions. It can be, I quite like the abstract timer, almost kind of like, oh, we have abstractly 3 times of day in a day. We have like the morning, the afternoon, and the night, and you get to do one thing in the morning, one thing in the afternoon, or one thing at night. Sometimes the time limit isn't real. Like you're telling the players that, oh, we need to investigate this place before it closes. And then after an investigation, or when you're kind of like a subtle way of saying there's nothing more here to do, you can be like, oh, you abstractly like check your watch and it's now 2 hours before closing. You might want to go and see what else you can do before it closes. And it gives everybody a reminder that, oh, while we're playing in the space in the fiction, time is also passing in the fiction, and keeping that up is a good way of keeping that pace. I'm going to run over there. Was there another question up on this end? I'll be with you in just a second, darling. Thank you.
In addition to like breaking the character thing you mentioned earlier, do you find the difference between like private games and games you stream or otherwise publicize with mysteries? Like any like practical differences or something like that?
Thank you. For me, interestingly, I'm going to talk while I'm walking around that way. Because I started my kind of like tabletop rolling career as primarily recording games, it's now like gear shifted my brain to always think in a way that keeps the pace up even if the camera isn't on me, because I guess I get fidgety if a game gets too slow. But I think it's easier to break character when you're not being recorded. Even in podcast sessions, you can still edit it out, right? There might be a point where you need to go and do some clarifying things, but it's not interesting for the story. So you're like, we're just going to break here where we can discuss things and go back in. And that's normal and fine. And I think that can be encouraged to do live as well sometimes. This isn't specifically about mysteries. I guess it's about running actual play streams. But people can have a really unrealistic idea of how a game works when they only ever watch hyper-edited, high-budget versions of games and assume that if their game at home isn't that, then their game is bad. And that's a tragedy. You don't need to be a professional voice actor or costumer or makeup artist or story writer to have a fun game that everybody enjoys. And one of the ways that games that are recorded and streamed can be really good at breaking that energy is being willing to stop on recording and highlight something. Safety tools are actually a really good thing to kind of bring up actively in recording if people know what safety tools are. Sure. For those who are watching, at home or whatever in the future, you might not know what that is. Safety tools is just using a system of letting players highlight that the game needs to be paused because there's something about it that's uncomfortable for whatever reason, and navigating around that and destigmatizing that, I think. It can be really difficult when you're live and somebody is having a bad time to stop and check in with them. And I think the more that people are willing to kind of do that, the less stigmatizing it gets. There was a stream series that I was doing relatively recently where the evidence of somebody who was severely injured could have potentially been read as a suicide attempt. And I as a person, my character raised that, but as I raised it, being kind of like, we're checking in. If this is a topic that people would be very uncomfortable with, we can stop and move around it. And funnily enough, somebody's connection dipped when that topic came up. So then I read that as actually I was going too fast too soon and they just quit the call. And then everybody was kind of having a professional panic moment. Kind of like, we're not panicking because we're live, but also we need to make sure that that person is okay. And they were actually perfectly fine. They were just having and when they reconnected again, because they were like, oh, they're in the middle of talking, so I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to interrupt them. And then we're like, she's really quiet. Oh no. But it was all fine. But actually having those moments and being willing to kind of check in on people and making those breaks in character is something that can happen really easily off air, but it should be happening on air more as well, if that's a reverse of how you asked that question. But thank you. I think you wanted the questions on, yes.
I actually have two questions, if that's okay.
Rude.
I know, right?
Oh my God.
My first question would be, as a DM, I'm fairly new, and I want to avoid trying to railroad my players into my story. Do you have any tips on how I could do that? Because I'm constantly afraid that I'm just forcing them to do whatever my story tells them to do, which I'm afraid that I'm going to strip them of their agency.
Railroading is a myth. No, I'm being pithy, but people are always, because railroading is a term that people are aware of, it makes them feel that, oh, games need to be so open that I can't tell my players to do anything. And what you get is kind of a noodly mess where people don't have any direction of where they need to go because the GM is really scared about telling people where the interesting thing is. You want people to find where the interesting thing is. And telling people where the interesting thing is, I think, is entirely normal and valid. And don't be afraid to be kind of like, hey, I have an interesting thing to do at the pub. You can just not go to the pub if you don't think it's an interesting thing that you want to go and do. But there is content there. And also similarly being like, oh, we can go over the hill and see what's on the other side of the hill, but hands up, I don't actually have anything prepared. And we can improvise it, but just so you know, yeah. I think the easiest way, if you want to kind of avoid having that conversation at all, is to do collaborative world building with your players. With one of the campaigns that I showed there, the Arcana Core, we had a session 0 where I gave them the city map that was broken into different districts. And I'm like, in the shopping district, what interesting things are there? And then I added that to the world. And then, because the players knew that those places existed, and because they designed them themselves, they were super excited to be able to go to those places. Even though I had already written the things that are at that location, they felt that they had a lot of agency because it's a place that they made and it's a place that they knew that they could go and visit. And so it's kind of working with your players to make interesting places to visit. How about I go with you and then you can ask your second question real quick. Cool.
Thank you. So I was thinking about that using like the final confrontation with the culprit as a combat system. I thought that was super interesting because I have players who really love mystery, and then I have those players at the same table who are like, I'm not smart and I get frustrated easily, and it's hard to sort of bring those two together. So I was thinking that I really want to try the combat one, but is there some sort of tricks to make sure that it doesn't fall flat? Like, I'm instantly afraid of the fact that maybe if they don't have enough clues and they would like lose.
Sure. Entirely improving here, but follow with me on this journey, this emotional journey that we're doing here. Say that there is, in this dragon game, you manage to find what's called like the solver, and it's a magic sword that is powered by the truth. And you get not bonus, and you get some kind of bonus in this argument with the person, with this dragon, this lying murderous dragon that you're trying to go and slay. And then the dragon spits lies at you, and the players are like, hey, we found a clue that counteracts the thing that the dragon said. And the sword is like, hell yeah. And then you're like, maybe it's guaranteed to hit. The thing that winds me up about Dungeons & Dragons so much is that you can spend half an hour waiting for your turn, and then you roll one die, and then it's like nothing happens, and then you have to wait another half an hour. So anything that prevents that circumstance from happening is the thing I adore. So it's like maybe if you're using the right clue, the sword always hits. Or maybe if it's kind of like there are players who like doing the clue solving and there's a person that just wants to roll big number and swing axe, maybe the people who are good at the clue solving give the clues to the barbarian who's like, now my axe is superpowered and it does extra damage, and then everybody gets to kind of feel involved in that process. Also, games where intimidation rolls are, I think, usually the kind of like aggressive characters are pretty good at intimidation, right? Hey, it can be the balance of writing scenarios, you know what your players can do and are good at, and then finding those circumstances that are like, this is a scene where the barbarian is really going to shine. It's an arm wrestling contest. It's somebody that requires intimidation. It's something that needs a specific detail from the barbarian's culture that only they would know. That kind of thing is a really good way of writing, knowing what your players can do. We're going to take this final question, and then I think we're going to wrap. I'm cognizant that people have not had lunch, and I want you all to eat and be healthy. You have 15 minutes. Sure. That's probably not going to be enough time to like do the mystery writing thing together, so I think I'll let people be able to go escape and eat early. But yeah. Let's get this final question for you, my dear.
All right, thank you so much for allowing me a second question. I have a group of players, one of whom is very independent, wants to do things on their own, in character and out of character, and other than having a conversation with such a player and like as a DM, because like that's what I usually would do, what are some ways that in game I could encourage more teamwork in my like group of players?
So I kind of cut my teeth in playing tabletop RPGs with kind of like cyberpunk style games, and they all classically have a bit of an Ocean's 11 style format to them, where you're all a team, but you're all specialized in your different things. And your specialization in different things doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be in the same place that everybody else is. And the way that Ocean's 11 does it is that it's very good at doing those transitions between what's going on this side of the manor versus this side of the manor versus this side of the manor. So this is maybe a clever writing trick. Maybe it's kind of having a conversation with the guy who likes to go solo in advance, being like, okay, the thing that we're going to be doing next is going to have some bits that you're best at doing, and you're going to have to go away from everybody else to do it. But it might be harder because you're alone, or it's going to be reliant on what your other team members are going to be able to do. You can't get through that door because you don't have the passcode, and the other people are trying to find the passcode so they can send it to you, and then you can have your cool moment where you go. Because I guess that's the bit that they find their joy in, right? Is being able to succeed at something that nobody else can do. And I can understand that. I think that's why heist-style games work really well, because when you're the hacker, you get to do all the hacker things that nobody else can do, and you get to feel real smug about it. So finding those instances where them going off on their own is specifically beneficial to everybody else because they're getting something that helps everybody else. Or it's a way to put that time pressure on. We have to do something by end of day, and the only way that we're going to be able to do all these specific things is to split up. And letting them go do that, and kind of guiding those ways that if they want to go off and do a thing on their own is specifically helping the wider arc of the mission that you're supposed to do. I think generally reminding people what the mission of the session is works regardless of genre, because you get to everybody's kind of going in knowing like today is the day that we are going to be killing the dragon with the sword of truth that says fuck yeah when you give it clues. And so everybody's going to be building up towards that moment because they know that's the sick thing that's going to be happening. Okay. Yeah, I think we did the thing. Everybody. Yeah. A handful of bits and pieces of information for y'all. So I put together a playlist that covers a bunch of the stuff that we talked about, like the explanation of City of Mist, the Alexandrian talking about the 3-clue rule, those specific streamed tabletop sessions where I'm doing mystery-specific stuff. You can get it all out of that bit.ly. And you can see my games played live on Twitch and YouTube as a bit of self-promo. In October, in every Saturday in October except the first Saturday of October, I will be doing something called Phantom Arts Fest, which is a bunch of one-shot streams done by GMs from my tabletop community. I have like a performing troupe of people who work with me. And each of them is GMing a separate game, and I'm producing them all, so kind of making them all as shiny as possible. And it's going to be absolutely wild. There's like 7 different sessions across 4 total days. It'll be a rip riot. You can follow me on Twitch, YouTube. Nobody uses Twitter/X anymore. You can find me on Tumblr if you use that still. I don't know. Yeah. I wrote my kind of obsession with mystery writing started at like the start of my games writing career. So one of the first things I did was a zine called The Queer Cyberpunk's Guide to Tabletop RPGs. It includes my original essay about mystery writing, which this kind of presentation is adapted and updated from, and you can get it at sixofspades.itch.io, including all my other games. Thank you very much. I spent a lot of euros on things from Fantasy Appellate this weekend, so please give me that money back. Thank you. And yeah, I do actually have a couple copies of the zine with me. I think as a reward for the people who came and asked questions, please come snag one of these as a thank you for your time. And in general, I'll be around if anybody has any other bonus questions they want to ask or want to chat. Otherwise, go get lunch, go enjoy the sunshine, go be happy and healthy. Thank you. No worries. I'm glad you enjoyed.